Deathwing is one of the most iconic villains in all of Warcraft, but he wasn't always a villain. He was actually the most trusted, most respected protector the world had ever known. And the story of how he went from planetary guardian to world-ending apocalypse is one of the greatest tragedies in gaming. So let's break it all down, starting at the very beginning. Neltharion, the Earth Warder. Before there was Deathwing, there was Neltharion. And Neltharion wasn't just some dragon. He was one of 5 dragon aspects, chosen and empowered by the Titans themselves to safeguard the entire world of Azeroth. His domain was the earth. Every mountain, every fault line, every cavern stretching miles beneath the surface. All of it was his responsibility, and he took that job seriously. The Titans didn't hand out these titles lightly. These were cosmic beings who shaped entire planets, and they looked at Neltharion and said, yeah, you're the one we trust with the foundation of everything. He was given dominion over the deep places of the world, tasked with maintaining geological stability across the entire planet. Essentially, if Azeroth had a structural engineer, it was him, and for thousands of years he delivered. He wasn't just competent, he was exceptional. Long after the Titans had departed Azeroth, Neltharion continued his vigil over the deep earth without fail. While he would later retreat to the elemental realm of Deepholm to lick his wounds, his original charge was much bigger. He was literally bound to the physical crust of Azeroth itself. He kept the very bones of the planet stable, holding tectonic forces in check that would have torn continents apart without his influence. Among the 5 aspects, Neltharion was arguably the most respected. Alexstrasza guarded life. Ysera watched over the dream. Nozdormu protected the Timeways. Malygos oversaw magic, but Neltharion, he held the planet together. Literally, the ground beneath everyone's feet existed in one piece because of him. He was noble. He was powerful. He was loyal. For millennia, nobody had a single reason to doubt him, which makes what happens next so much worse, because the dragon trusted most with protecting the planet's foundations would eventually become the single greatest threat to its survival. It all started with a voice in the dark, the whispers of the old gods. Here's the thing about the old gods. They didn't kick down Neltharion's door and offer him a deal. They didn't tempt him with power or promise him dominion over the other aspects. That would have been too easy, and honestly, he would have said no. Neltharion was loyal. He loved Azeroth more than anything, and that's exactly what they used against him. After the Titans defeated the elemental lords and imprisoned them beneath Azeroth's surface, the old gods, ancient eldritch horrors chained deep underground, found themselves uncomfortably close to the one dragon whose entire job was shaping the deep earth. Neltharion spent more time near these prisons than any other living being on the planet, and the whispers started, not screaming, not demands, whispers. They built slowly over centuries, a constant, maddening presence that didn't announce itself so much as blend into his own thoughts. The old gods didn't tell Neltharion he was wrong about anything. They told him he was right about everything. His love for Azeroth? They twisted it into fear. What happens when the Titans leave and never come back? Who protects the world then? His pride as Earth Warder, they fed it. You're the only one who truly understands what Azeroth needs. The others don't care like you do. They never have. It's psychological horror in its purest form. They took every noble quality he had and rotated it exactly 2 degrees until it pointed somewhere dark. His dedication became obsession. His vigilance became paranoia. His confidence became megalomania. And the worst part is, at no point during this process did Neltharion think he was being corrupted. He thought he was waking up. By the time anyone could have noticed something was off, there was nothing left to save. The whispers had already rewritten his motivations from the inside out. He wasn't hearing voices telling him to destroy. He was hearing his own voice, or what he believed was his own voice, telling him he was the only one brave enough to do what needed to be done. The old gods didn't create a villain. They convinced a hero that everyone else had already failed. And that hero, he was about to build a weapon that would prove it. The creation of the Dragon Soul. This is the greatest con job in the history of Azeroth, and nobody saw it coming. Here's the setup. The Burning Legion is bearing down on the world. Demons are pouring through portals, everything is on fire, and the 5 dragon aspects need a plan. Neltharion, the Earth Warder, the guy everyone trusts implicitly, steps forward with a proposal. He wants to build a weapon. Not just any weapon, the weapon. A single artifact powerful enough to annihilate demons, control dragons, and turn the tide of the entire war. All he needs is one small thing from each of his 4 closest allies, their life force. Every single aspect agreed. Alexstrasza, Ysera, Malygos, Nosdormu, they each poured a portion of their own essence, their own power, into a disc-shaped artifact that Neltharion designed and built himself. And this wasn't a temporary loan, this was permanent. The moment their power left their bodies and entered that disc, it was gone. They would never get it back. They were fundamentally irreversibly weaker than they had been before, and they did it willingly because they trusted him. Let me explain why that trust mattered so much. These are beings who had guarded Azeroth together for thousands of years. They'd fought side by side against elemental lords. They'd been empowered by the Titans themselves. Neltharion wasn't some stranger asking for a favor. He was family. So when he said, "Give me your power and I'll save us all," nobody questioned it. Nobody asked, "Spec the weapon." Nobody suggested maybe they should all share custody of the thing. They just handed it over. Here's where it gets dark. Neltharion had secretly laced the Dragon Soul with old god corruption. Every whisper, every paranoid thought, every ounce of madness that had been building inside him for centuries, he wove directly into the artifact's core. What was supposed to be Dragonkind's greatest collaborative achievement was actually a trap. A beautifully designed, perfectly executed trap built to enslave or destroy every dragon that had just volunteered to make it possible. The Dragon Soul wasn't a shield, it was a leash, and 4 out of 5 aspects had just handed over the keys to their own destruction without a second thought. The most powerful weapon on Azeroth, capable of controlling or annihilating dragons and demons alike, was now in the hands of a corrupted madman, and his 4 weakened allies had zero idea what was about to happen, but they were about to find out because the War of the Ancients was about to take a very different turn. The betrayal at the War of the Ancients. Approximately 10,000 years before the First War, the allied forces of Azeroth were actually winning. Night elves, dragons, demigods, all of them fighting side by side against the Burning Legion in what would become known as the War of the Ancients. The demons were being pushed back. Victory was, for the first time, genuinely within reach. And that's exactly when Neltharion detonated everything. Mid-battle, with the Legion on the back foot and the allied forces surging forward, Neltharion activated the Dragon Soul. But he didn't aim it at the demons, he aimed it at everyone, his allies, his brothers and sisters, the dragonflights that had poured their own essence into the weapon because they trusted him. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. Entire generations of blue, bronze, red, and green dragons were enslaved or killed in moments. Not over the course of a war, not through attrition, in moments. Thousands of years of dragonkind, entire bloodlines, entire families gone because they made the mistake of trusting the Earth Warder with a weapon he designed to betray them. Here's what makes this so much worse than a standard betrayal. It wasn't just that he turned on his allies, it's when he turned on them, the allied forces were winning. The Burning Legion was being driven back. If Neltharion had done literally nothing, just sat there and watched, the outcome of the war could have been completely different. Instead, his treachery shattered the allied front at the exact moment it mattered most, and the Legion surged back with a vengeance. The chaos that followed cascaded into the single most destructive event in Azeroth's history, the Sundering. The supercontinent of Kalimdor, the entire landmass of the known world, was ripped apart. The Well of Eternity imploded, the land fractured, and the Great Sea flooded in to fill the gap. Millions died. Civilizations vanished overnight. The geography of the entire planet was permanently rewritten because one dragon decided that the middle of an apocalyptic war was the perfect time to settle a grudge, and the thing is, none of it had to happen. That's the part that sticks with people even now. If Neltharion stays loyal, the Legion gets pushed back, the Well of Eternity doesn't implode, and the Sundering never occurs, the entire shape of the world, literally the continents people walk on, exists because of one act of betrayal at the worst possible second. Cool. So that's a shattered planet, millions dead, and the Dragonflight's crippled for millennia, but Neltharion himself, he wasn't done changing. Not even close. Because the Dragon Soul didn't just break the world, it broke him too, and what came crawling out of the aftermath barely resembled a dragon at all. The transformation into Deathwing. Here's the thing about Neltharion's fall. Most villains get corrupted and then show up looking evil. New coat of paint, glowing eyes, maybe a skull helmet. Neltharion did something far worse. He did it to himself, and it started the moment he unveiled the Dragon Soul. During the War of the Ancients, Neltharion convinced the other aspects to pour their power into a golden disc he claimed would save them all. The moment it was complete, he turned it on everyone, allies and enemies alike. And the backlash from channeling that much stolen power began tearing him apart right there on the battlefield. His scales cracked. Molten fire became visible beneath the surface of his skin, glowing through the fissures like magma, pushing through fractured rock. He walked into that war as the Earth Warder. He walked out of it as something else entirely. The other dragons named him Deathwing before he ever chose the title himself after the war. The demon soul was pried from his grasp and hidden away, warded, so he could never wield it again. But losing the disc didn't undo the damage. His body was literally falling apart from the inside out, unable to contain the volume of corruption the old gods kept feeding into him. So he did what any reasonable person would do. He bolted metal plates directly into his own flesh. Elementium armor was fused to his body, not worn like armor, but grafted and riveted into muscle and bone to physically hold him together. Every plate was a bandage over a wound that would never heal. Every bolt was driven through living tissue. Picture the most majestic dragon in existence, standing in the dark, systematically hammering metal into his own chest, because without it, he'd split open like an overripe fruit. Which is, not ideal, but the worst detail is what happened to his mind. Over those long years of deepening corruption and physical agony, Neltharion's consciousness fractured into splintered pieces of awareness that no longer communicated with each other in any coherent way. The whispers of the old gods weren't background noise anymore. They were the only voice left. By the time he retreated into Deepholm to brood and plot, the dragon known as Neltharion was functionally gone. What remained wasn't a dragon with a grudge, it was closer to an elemental force wearing a dragon's ruined body. No reason, no restraint, no draconic honor or ancient wisdom, just destruction given form, held together by metal and madness and the fading echo of a titan's blessing that had long since curdled into something unrecognizable. He called himself Deathwing, and for once the name wasn't an exaggeration, but a monster this powerful doesn't stay underground forever. And when Deathwing finally decided to announce himself to the world, he chose the worst possible moment for everyone involved, the day of the dragon at grim battle. For centuries, nobody knew where Deathwing went. After the War of the Ancients tore the world apart and the other aspects barely survived his betrayal, he just vanished, disappeared into the earth like he'd never existed. Most assumed he was dead, or at least too broken to ever return, which, to be fair, is a reasonable assumption when someone's body is literally falling apart and held together by metal plates. But Deathwing wasn't dead. He was waiting. Beneath the fortress of Grim Battle in Cosmodan, he spent centuries hiding, healing, and scheming. Not raging, not thrashing around in some underground cavern like a wounded animal, planning. Because here's the thing about Deathwing that separates him from every other giant monster in Warcraft lore. He's patient, terrifyingly, calculatedly patient. He sat underground for hundreds of years watching the world above tear itself apart, and he waited for the exact right moment to come back. That moment was the Second War. When the Horde invaded Azeroth and the mortal races were busy killing each other, Deathwing emerged, and his return was not subtle. The region around Grim Battle was devastated. Thousands died. The earth itself split open as he clawed his way to the surface, announcing to every living thing on the continent that the destroyer had returned. It was a statement, a declaration. I'm back, and you're all too busy fighting each other to do anything about it. But he didn't just start burning cities. That's what a mindless monster would do. Deathwing had evolved. He found the Dragon Maw Orc clan and manipulated them into using the Dragon Soul, his own creation, to enslave Alexstrasza, the red dragon aspect, the queen of all lifebinders, the most compassionate and powerful healer on Azeroth, chained up like livestock and forced to breed dragons for the Horde's war machine. Her children born into slavery were used as weapons of war before they even understood what they were. Let that sink in for a second. Deathwing didn't enslave her himself. He got someone else to do it. He handed the orcs the tool, pointed them at the target, and watched from the shadows while the aspect of life was turned into a breeding factory, which is, you know, not ideal. This is where Deathwing's entire playbook shifted permanently. He stopped being the dragon who charged into battle and tried to overpower everyone with brute force. That approach nearly killed him during the War of the Ancients. Instead, he became something worse, a puppeteer. Every mortal faction, every enslaved dragon, every desperate alliance became a piece on his board. He didn't need to fight when he could get everyone else to fight for him. The other aspects eventually freed Alexstrasza, but the damage was done, not just to her, not just to the red dragonflight, but to the balance of power across Azeroth. Deathwing had proven that he could manipulate entire civilizations from the shadows without ever showing his face, and he was just getting started. Because what he did to Grim Batol was nothing compared to what he'd eventually do to the entire planet. The shattering of Azeroth, everything I've told you so far happened in books, in lore entries, and backstory that most players never actually read. This is the moment that changed, because in 2010, Deathwing stopped being a character in a wiki article and became the thing that destroyed your favorite zone while you were offline. The Cataclysm expansion didn't just add Deathwing to the game, it let him break it. Literally, he burst through the dimensional barriers separating the elemental plane from Azeroth, and the result was the single most catastrophic event the planet had ever experienced. We're not talking about a localized disaster here. We're talking about every continent, every region, every biome on the entire planet being hit simultaneously. The Barrens, one of the most iconic zones in the game, was torn completely in two by a massive volcanic fissure. Thousand Needles, a desert canyon zone that players had been questing through for 6 years, was completely submerged underwater. Stormwind, the Alliance capital, had its entire park district obliterated just because Deathwing happened to fly over it on his way somewhere else. He wasn't even targeting it. That was collateral damage from his flight path, which is, you know, not ideal. And those are just the changes players could see on a map. Countless lives were lost across both continents. Entire civilizations were displaced overnight. Regions that had been habitable for millennia were rendered completely uninhabitable in seconds. Coastlines moved, mountains collapsed, forests caught fire from the inside out. The geography of Azeroth was permanently, irreversibly altered. Here's what made this hit different from every other world-ending threat in WoW's history. Players who logged in after the Cataclysm patch literally saw a different world. The zones they'd leveled through, the paths they'd walked 1,000 times, the landmarks they used to navigate, gone, changed, flooded, on fire. Deathwing didn't just threaten Azeroth in a cutscene. He reached through the screen and rearranged the game you'd been playing for years, and the truly insane part, you'd think a planet literally tearing itself apart would get the Alliance and the Horde to put their differences aside. It didn't, not even close. The Cataclysm actually made things worse between them. The destruction created power vacuums, displaced populations, and opened up new territory worth fighting over. So instead of uniting against the giant molten dragon ripping continents in half, they used the chaos as an excuse to escalate their war. An extinction level threat. And these two factions looked at it and said, great, now let's also fight each other over the rubble. Like, priorities. And the worst part, Deathwing wasn't done. The shattering wasn't his endgame, it was his entrance. The geological apocalypse that reshaped an entire planet was just him showing up. The actual plan was so much worse, but he didn't do it alone, because waiting for him on the surface was an army of fanatics who'd been preparing for this moment for years. The Twilight's Hammer Alliance. Here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. Deathwing didn't just show up and start breaking things, he had an entire cult waiting for him. The Twilight's Hammer was a doomsday organization devoted to the old gods that had been operating across Azeroth long before Deathwing ever burst through the maelstrom, but the moment he returned, they pledged absolute loyalty to him as the ultimate instrument of the void. And their leader was exactly as unhinged as you'd expect. respect. Cho'Gall, a two-headed ogre mage who served as the cult's high priest and Deathwing's primary ground-level operator. He coordinated elemental incursions, organized cult cells across every major continent, and ran the whole operation out of a lovely little place called the Twilight Citadel. While Deathwing was busy reshaping the planet from above, Cho'Gall was making sure the chaos spread at street level. Every elemental uprising, every corrupted settlement, every faction destabilized from within. That was Cho'Gall's handiwork. The guy had two brains and used both of them for causing problems. But the cult wasn't just about sabotage. They were building something. Deathwing and the Twilight's hammer created an entirely new breed of dragon, Twilight dragons. These were corrupted hybrids. Part dragon, part elemental, stitched together through old god magic and owing loyalty to zero existing dragonflights. Not the reds, not the blues, not even the blacks. They were Deathwing's personal replacement army. Think about that for a second. He wasn't just trying to destroy dragonkind, he was trying to replace it. Every dragonflight that had ever existed, every legacy the Titans had built, Deathwing wanted to overwrite all of it with his own corrupted version, which is, not ideal for anyone who liked the original dragons. Now here's where it gets complicated, and honestly a little uncomfortable if you think about it too hard. The command structure of this whole operation was deliberately murky on the surface. Cho'Gall served Deathwing. Simple enough, Deathwing gave orders, Cho'Gall executed them, but both of them ultimately served the old gods. Cho'Gall was a devoted old god fanatic before Deathwing ever entered the picture, and Deathwing's mind had been shattered and rebuilt by those same old gods thousands of years earlier. So who was actually in charge? Was Deathwing the mastermind using the cult as his personal army? Or was he just the biggest, most impressive puppet in a chain of puppets with the old gods pulling every string from deep beneath the earth? Cho'Gall didn't seem to care about the distinction. He worshipped destruction itself, and Deathwing was the most destructive thing on the planet. But the old gods had been manipulating Neltharion since before human civilization existed. Every decision Deathwing made, every alliance he formed, every Twilight dragon he created, all of it could have been exactly what the Void wanted all along. The scariest part isn't that Deathwing might have been a puppet, it's that he probably didn't know, or worse, he knew and couldn't stop it. A world-ending dragon with an army of corrupted hybrids and a fanatical cult at his command, and none of it might have been his idea, but regardless of who was pulling the strings, the machine was built and running, and it had one purpose: the Hour of Twilight. Here's the thing about fighting a dragon: you find it, you hit it until it dies, you take its stuff. Simple, brutal, effective. But by the time patch 4.3 rolled around in November 2011, Deathwing had made that impossible. Not because he was too strong to kill, though he absolutely was, because killing him might kill everything else too. Let me explain. Deathwing had spent the entire Cataclysm not just destroying Azeroth, but fusing with it. His corruption had seeped so deep into the elemental plane that he was literally merging with reality itself. The Dragon Soul, that same disc he'd tricked the other aspects into empowering 10,000 years ago, was now acting as a bridge between his body and the planet's core. He wasn't sitting on top of Azeroth anymore, he was becoming part of it. Every volcano, every fault line, every tremor in the deep earth had a little bit of Deathwing woven into it. So the problem wasn't, how do we kill a giant dragon? The problem was, how do we rip a corrupted elemental force out of the fabric of the world without unraveling the world in the process? Which is, not ideal. The Twilight's hammer knew this was the endgame. Cho'Gall's fanatics launched their final offensive against Mount Hyjal and the World Tree, throwing everything they had at Azeroth's last natural defenses. The goal was simple: buy Deathwing enough time to finish assimilating. Once he fully merged with the planet, there would be no separating them. The Hour of Twilight would arrive, the old god's vision of total annihilation would be complete, and every living thing on Azeroth would cease to exist, not conquered, not enslaved, erased, but the dragon aspects had one card left to play, and the irony of it was almost too perfect: the Dragon Soul. Neltharion's masterpiece. The weapon he had deceived his own brothers and sisters into pouring their essence into all those millennia ago. The artifact that had shattered the unity of dragonkind, enslaved entire flights, and nearly ended the War of the Ancients in catastrophe. That weapon was the only thing powerful enough to unmake what Deathwing had become. 10,000 years of tragedy, and it all came back to the same golden disc. The aspects devised a desperate plan: retrieve the Dragon Soul from the Time Ways, supercharge it with their combined power one final time, and turn it against the dragon who created it. Every ounce of energy Neltharion had stolen from them would be redirected back at him. The very betrayal that started this entire nightmare would be the thing that ended it. But there was a cost. There's always a cost. Using the Dragon Soul at that magnitude would require the aspects to pour everything they had into it, not a portion of their power, all of it. Their immortality, their cosmic authority, their connection to the Titans who had blessed them in the first place. To stop one corrupted aspect, the remaining 4 would have to sacrifice everything that made them aspects at all. No clean solution. No clever workaround. Just sacrifice. The full weight of 10,000 years of manipulation, madness, and betrayal had converged on a single moment, and the only way forward was through but having a plan and actually executing it against a dragon who had become one with the planet itself. Those are two very different things. The fall of Deathwing at the Maelstrom. 10,000 years ago, Neltharion helped tear the world in half. The Sundering ripped the ancient supercontinent apart, drowned civilizations, and left a wound in the center of Azeroth's ocean so deep it never healed. The Maelstrom, a massive, churning whirlpool of raw elemental chaos, spinning endlessly over the exact spot where the Well of Eternity once stood. And that's exactly where Deathwing died. The Dragon Soul raid was the final confrontation of the Cataclysm, and it took place in 2 phases. The first saw players literally fighting on Deathwing's back as he flew toward the Maelstrom, prying elementium plates off his body while his molten blood tried to kill everything in sight. The second phase happened at the Maelstrom itself, where what was left of Deathwing, barely holding together, rose from the churning void for one last stand. But here's the thing, you couldn't just kill him. Yeah, not conventionally. Deathwing had fused so completely with the old god's power and the elemental plane that destroying his body wasn't enough. He had to be ripped out of reality, so the remaining dragon aspects did the only thing they could. Alexstrasza, Nosdormu, Ysera, and Kalekos pooled every last drop of their power into the very weapon that started all of this, the Dragon Soul. The same artifact Neltharion had tricked them into empowering 10,000 years earlier, like the same disc that had enslaved their flights, shattered their trust, and kicked off the entire nightmare, only this time they knew exactly what it would cost them. They poured their essence into the Dragon Soul willingly, and they used it to tear Deathwing from Azeroth. His body disintegrated across multiple planes of existence, ripped apart by the raw elemental chaos of the Maelstrom. The same wound he helped create swallowed him whole, and then the Dragon Soul shattered. Its destruction severed the old god's strongest physical connection to Azeroth's surface. That part was a win. But the cost was everything. Alexstrasza, Nosdormu, Ysera, Kalagos, every one of them lost their immortality. The vast majority of their power gone. Permanently, they aged, they weakened, they quietly withdrew from the affairs of the world they'd spent millennia protecting. The Age of Dragons was over. Think about what that means for a second. The first time the aspects gave their power to Neltharion, they did it out of blind trust, and it nearly destroyed them. The last time they gave their power, they did it with full knowledge that it would end them as aspects forever. Same sacrifice. Completely different choice. The first time they were deceived. The second time they volunteered, and Deathwing died at the exact scar his own betrayal had carved into the world. Full circle. The Sundering that began his reign of terror also ended it. 10,000 years of corruption, manipulation, destruction, and madness, and it all collapsed back into the same wound. Here's what nobody really says about Deathwing, though. This isn't just a story about a big dragon who went crazy and got killed in a raid. It's a tragedy. Neltharion was the Earth Warder. He was trusted by the Titans themselves to protect the bones of the world. He loved Azeroth, genuinely. And the old gods took that love and twisted it into paranoia, then rage, then something that barely resembled a living creature anymore. Stopping him required his former peers to sacrifice everything they once shared. Their power, their immortality, their purpose. They won, but they lost the thing that made them who they were. And Neltharion? He lost that a long time ago. The story of Deathwing is the story of what corruption costs everyone, not just the corrupted, not just the betrayed, but the entire world caught between them. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.